welcome to another episode. We are going to be answering questions on living, loving, and leading in this episode. This is where people have sent in questions. I haven't more or less really seen them. I'm reading them more or less for the first time. And I'm going to just give an answer from my heart that I believe will help all of us. So let's go to the first question. Uncommunicated expectations are often the cause of conflict. Is that a true statement? If yes, can you speak on it? If no, why? What do you think? I say yes. I think uncommunicated expectations are a really big cause of conflicts in our lives. We assume that people should know what we are thinking or should know to do better. And we haven't necessarily communicated what it is we want. I'll give you a good example of this. I was going early to work one day, so I tend to work from home, and when I'm delivering in person, I would typically be traveling. And so one day I was going to be delivering here in the UK, and I was leaving very early in the morning, so I needed to get out of the house by 7 a.m. and my wife needed to leave early as well, but she had to wait because I needed to leave by 7 a.m. Will not be able to drop my son in nursery until earliest was 7:30, usually between 7:30 and 8. And my wife was a bit frustrated because she also needed to get out of the house early, but she had a bit more flexibility. So I was about to leave and she communicated her expectation and she said, what can you do to help make this morning easier for me? Now, interestingly enough, I was about to be like, no, but I have to go. And I actually did that, to be honest. So a little bit upset. And then when I stepped out of the room, I very quickly, in Nigeria, they would say I borrowed some sense. And I was like, well, Uche, what can you do? I said, get his clothes, get something he can wear and just get that sorted. And so I get something and then I begin to iron what he would wear very quickly so that would at least help her and save her some time. And I look at the time and say, actually, I can probably spare another few minutes. And I say, sweetie, do you have what you're going to wear? If he hasn't been dry cleaned and you need to iron it, give it to me. I'll do it now. And she hands me a dress and I quickly get it straightened up for her. And she smiles and she's like, thank you so much. And that's it. Now, I give that story to say, she may have just thought, what kind of a man is this? He knows we are both rushed for time. We both need to leave early. And he didn't even bother to ask me, how can he help? He just left. That was her expectation. Help me in some way. And guess what? If she didn't say anything, I would have rushed out of the house and come back in the evening and things might be a little bit tense. So communicate your expectations and don't say that I asked for this once, so you should know. If you need something as often as you need it, if the other person hasn't taken the initiative to do it, just ask for it. And don't say I shouldn't be asking you again. All those things don't help in the relationship. Whether this is personal, like me, my wife, or with my siblings, whoever, friends, or at work, the same thing. You have your manager and you expect that they should do certain things, and then when they don't do it, you begin to get upset, and then conflict begins to brew. I remember a lady that I lead did exactly that. And she said, I'm upset because my expectation is that you should do this, you should do that, you should check in, and that way you should do this. And I said, at certain levels of leadership, we get to a point, and you are at that level of leadership now where if you need something, you ask. We're all quite busy. And then I give the example of my wife and what happened just a few days ago. And she starts to smile sheepishly, and says, okay, thank you. I see your point. So I'll pause there. I hope that example gives you some key insights. And if you're married, I would just like to say, not blowing my own horn, whatever you can do, however little, to help your partner, please do. That actually applies for any relationship. Okay, let's go to the second question. One lesson your marriage has taught you. Now, this is a difficult one. It's difficult because there are so many lessons that my marriage has taught me. The biggest one, not the biggest one, but one that comes to mind now, I would say, it's actually a scripture. It says that, you hypocrite. It says, rather than look at the speck of dust in your brother's eye, why don't you focus on removing the plank in your own eye? This is the classic, if you're pointing fingers, you have 3 or 4 pointing back at you. I think that's the biggest lesson that one of the biggest lessons I've learned in marriage. The idea that stop waiting for the other person to change. Just stop it, right? For as many things you think your partner, friend, brother, sister, colleague, whoever, for as many things you think they can do better or differently, there's probably just as many things that you need to do better or differently. Oftentimes we are comparing our strengths with somebody else's weaknesses, and that's not helpful in relationships. And so that quote, that scripture teaches a couple of things. The first one is we all have issues. So let's treat each other with grace. The second is focusing on you changing is all you have control over. You cannot, I will repeat, you cannot change anybody. I promise you, you can't change anybody who doesn't want to change something. Now, if somebody doesn't change, do you just accept it? It depends. If it's something you can live with, extend love and grace. If it's something you absolutely cannot live with and is only going to compound, and compounding is of anything negative is always bad because it will explode at some point negatively, then you're going to have conversations over and over again. In some instances, you may need to get an interpreter, somebody that can come, you both respect, you can share your thoughts with, and that person can help you understand each other. Sometimes that can be a real game changer. I'll pause on that question there. There's a lot more I can say, but I'll pause there and ask you to begin to focus on the plank in your own eye. You change and assist them in changing. Next question. Men and women communicate differently. What have you found is the best way to communicate better? Wow, communication is such a huge topic. And men and women in this case is talking about across every area of our life, isn't it? I think that, I'll say a couple of things that I believe help. The first one, I think the golden rule when it comes to effective communication is actually seek first to understand, then to be understood. I'm going to give you a very interesting story on this one. So I was reading the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And this is the key point he makes. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think that is the answer to this question, or at least the key answer. And so here I just read that portion of the book, and then my wife calls me. This was years ago. This is 10 plus years ago. And my wife calls me and she begins to rant about something at work that was really, frustrating. I really hurt her. And prior to reading the book, I will probably not even ask questions to really understand. I'll probably begin to provide solutions and say it's going to be okay and just tell her things. But in applying the lessons from the book, I say, okay, what I'm hearing you say is X, Y, Z. And she's like, yes, that's exactly how it feels. And then she speaks a little bit more. And I said, and because of that, you're feeling A, B, C. And she's like, exactly. That's exactly how I feel. And this is not fair. And, I do that and, going into how can I help? And before I even get to that question, I notice that she begins to cry. And I'm like, sweetie, what did I say? She said, no, I just feel really listened to. Amazing, isn't it? and I was like, wow, okay, this works. And so that's the first thing. The second thing that I will add is understanding people's communication styles, right? You need to know the person you're communicating with. Some people, generally speaking, want you to get straight to the point. And so a key tool I learned from some colleagues in a consultancy practice is BLUF, and that stands for bottom line upfront. You want to communicate with someone, go to the point, bottom line upfront. Say what you need to say, what is most important, say it upfront. Perhaps give 1 or 2 points that buttress the point you're making or the stance that you have. And once you've done that, open it up. Let them ask the questions they need to clarify or the questions they need for the additional data they want. That way of communicating can be really powerful. It doesn't mean you shouldn't still share stories and the like, but it just means that people's attention span is so short and you want to get to the point as quickly as you can. I hope those examples help when it comes to communicating better across differences, whether it's gender, whether it is race, whether it is age, whatever the differences are, those 2 things stand the test of time. The next question: how do you build relationships with senior stakeholders who don't have a vested interest in building relationships with you? This is around leadership now. It's a really good question. And corporate organizations or any organization really is a pyramid. Even if they say they have flat structures, it's really a pyramid. And so at the top, more and more people who are at the bottom of the pyramid and the middle of the pyramid want to build relationship with senior stakeholders, and they have less time and potentially are even more busy. Now, one fact is this: people are more likely to want to build relationships with people who look like them. That's a fact. Or people who have more in common with them. And so if you don't have similarities, commonalities, and then let's say in a sense you're more junior, then you need to stoop to conquer, and you need to be consistent. I think the key word here is going to be consistency. I think these things are always best with examples and stories. So I'll give you this example. There's a lady who was just promoted working in an investment bank to VP, and she was on the syndicate desk, so around raising capital, raising equity for companies. And if you're going to do that successfully, you need to have great relationship with the traders, the guys who are actually going to market, who are making market and are selling and trading the stocks. And she knew that if she was going to be anywhere near successful, she needed to have a good relationship with one of the star traders. And he knew he was a star, not just in the firm, but across the street. And so what did she do? She would go and say hello, not once, not twice, not 3, not 4, not 5 times. He would literally ignore her. And she's like, I'm standing, within eyeshot. I'm right there. He knows I'm standing close to his desk to have a conversation with him. And he will talk to people around me, next to him, and literally ignore me. Now, he's a star trader, strong performer, and older than her. So he doesn't need her for nothing. In this relationship, she needs him. Now, what would you do if you're in that situation? Are you going to sulk? Are you going to get angry? First, the key word in building relationships is being humble. She was humble. And she said, okay, what I'm doing isn't working, so I'm going to have to do something different. And I think therein lies another key lesson, in that when you're building relationships, right, if something you're doing isn't working, do something different. Say insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. So what did she do differently? This guy is a trader on the floor. One of the things they hate to do is leave their desk. And she made a note of when he stood up to go and get coffee. And so a few minutes before that time, usually, she would lunge up, stand up, go straight to his area of the bank of desks and say, hey guys, I'm going to go get some coffee. Would anybody like one? Different people will say, please get me this. Another person says, please get me that. And she would look at him and he'd be like, yes, please get me this. He doesn't want to leave his desk. She would go, she would get it, she would come back, give to everybody else, give to him last, and then compliment him on a new transaction is just priced, very successfully. And this went on for time. Eventually, because of her consistency, because of her fortitude, her perseverance, he began to have additional conversations. And when she congratulates him and he says thank you, she would then ask him a quick question. And they began to have conversation. She knew she had begun to break through when one day, before the time for coffee, he came to her and said, "Can I get you a coffee?" And this builds on a very key element on building relationships. It's called the law of reciprocity. There's a guy, Robert Cialdini, who wrote a book on influence. It's amazing. It's a great book to read. And on influence, one of the laws is the law of reciprocity. That if you do something for someone, no matter how small, in them, they feel like they have to do something for you. You know, and this can be manipulative, right? But you and I are not using it for manipulation. But we understand that as human beings, that is how we operate. And so I wrap up the story to say they built a great relationship going forward, and they've helped each other be equally successful. Her bringing some amazing deals to him that he can price and take to market. I hope that helps. I'll pause there. There's more to say, but I love these sessions because hearing your questions make it really practical, and I'm satisfying what your needs are. So please keep on sending these questions. Next question. How does a leader cultivate a culture of trust and transparency without exposing themselves too much? Wow, it's a good question. I think that first and foremost, I would say you can't build a culture of trust and transparency without exposing yourself, right? The bedrock, and I've said this, before. We're not going to reinvent new things to say. The bedrock of trust is vulnerability, right? It builds connection with people. Now, I guess the question is, can you be too vulnerable? Yes, you can, because sometimes we might be willing to share things. Let's say we are very open people, and then we have to acknowledge the fact that even though you're willing to share something, your audience might not be ready or willing to hear it. So that's where there can be such a thing as too much vulnerability. And so I think that vulnerability is a key one when it comes to building a culture of trust and transparency. The second one I would say is, owning up to your mistakes, right? So vulnerability is sharing effectively your weaknesses, right? Your fears sometimes. That's more on the vulnerability spectrum. When you also share your mistakes, that is amazing, because people know that it's okay to make a mistake. It builds trust. It builds transparency. You have, unfortunately, leaders who are so stoic, right? And they will never, want to own up to a mistake. And then one of the biggest lessons in building trust and transparency was I was leading someone. I still lead her. We have a great relationship. And I had done something that wasn't particularly nice. And when we eventually got to speaking, they highlighted how they were just so frustrated, tired, felt like they wanted to throw in the towel and didn't want to continue. And they were absolutely shocked when I, without batting an eyelid, said, "I feel exactly the same way many times." But I've learned to deal with it. Being vulnerable in that way helps. Or saying sorry. I've had to go to people and say, "Look, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. I could have done that differently and better." I remember recently somebody who I respect a lot, was a senior leader, gave the example of how she raised her voice to a staff member, and on reflection called the very junior staff member back into her office and said, "I'm sorry. I reacted, I raised my voice, and I shouldn't do that." So I will summarize this question and this answer in three ways. The first one is, you do need to be vulnerable, but don't overshare. There are avenues where we can share a lot, right? That can be with your friend. It can be with a really trusted colleague at the same level as you and more senior. A mentor, a sponsor. These are all places where you can share and share a lot. But with your team, you need to be careful. So vulnerability. The second that I would highlight is owning up to mistakes. Letting people know that it's okay and role modeling that for them. And then finally is saying sorry. Those are three critical things that if you do, when appropriate, you will build a strong culture of trust and transparency. Okay, let's go to the next question. And I think we're going to life now. Okay, this is a short one. What's your biggest life hack? My God. my biggest life hack has to be my quiet time in the morning. And what do I mean by my quiet time? It's the time where I get alone with God. It's a time for me to reflect on the day before, reflect on life. It's a time where I'm able to read. So I would typically read my Bible, and there would always be a book that I'm reading as well. It's a time where I plan, thinking through not just the day or the week. I just plan, reflect on the long term. And so my quiet time has a portion of prayer, has a portion of reading, has a portion of reflecting and conversation. I don't know where the most consistent thing in my life, when I think of the last 20 years, the most consistent thing in my life is a daily quiet time. The truth is, when you read the various books on success and people who are successful, I find this consistent, right? So I'm speaking from the perspective as a leader, but also as a Christian, and that aspect of my life. But I know a lot of people do exactly the same thing, right? They do exactly the same thing, wake up early in the morning, there's no disturbance, and they're able to think, they're able to reflect and move on. I think if you don't have that in your life, you need to introduce it. It makes a huge difference. People have written books, right? Just by applying that. I'm currently going through a doctorate, and my supervisor gave me the example of somebody who was a very senior person, a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, in a huge organization. If I call the name, you would all know it. And I said, how did he do it? He was so busy. How did he get time for a doctorate? He said he went to bed at between 8 and 9 p.m. He was up by 4 a.m. And between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., he worked on his doctorate for 2 hours, and then he went through the rest of the day. I thought, okay, perfect. Exactly what I was just saying about, creating those quiet moments where you can do real business. It's called the 2-hour advantage. If you cannot do 2 hours, 30 minutes is a good starting point. I just feel like I've given you so much that's a huge life hack. Okay, and then the final question for this episode. How does one deal with failure and setback? What practical steps can people take to help them bounce back? I think a couple of things. First and foremost, expect failure, right? I think sometimes, like when I was growing up, I had a different relationship with failure because I didn't expect to fail. So it's not about how much you prepare. It's not about how talented you are, how skilled you are. Failure is a part of life. And so when you know that failure happens, then you are less hard on yourself. The second thing is assess failure. Failure is there to be a stepping stone. Failure is there to help you learn, right? So assess failure. What didn't go well? Why didn't it go well? What was your role in it not going well? What could you have done differently? Take your findings to somebody you trust, a mentor, a friend. Review your thoughts, get additional insights from them, and then map out a way forward, right? Failure is only bad when you don't learn from it. That's the key thing I would say. Failure is only bad when you don't learn from it. In the interest of time, because I could say so much in this topic, I'll summarize with a statement, which is the title of a book by John Maxwell. Fail forward. It makes all the difference when you are dealing with a failure. And finally, a quote by Zig Ziglar that I just remembered, which probably shifted my perspective on failure completely, was failure is an event, not a person. Woo! That was so powerful when I read it well over 2 decades ago. And the point is, you never internalize failure. So I am not a failure. I failed at that event. It needs to be a relationship with the failure. You take responsibility for it. You don't blame other people for your failure, even if other people have a part to play in it. You take responsibility for your side and know that it's an event. You didn't do this properly. That doesn't mean you don't do everything else properly. And so if I fail at something, I encourage myself, not only by learning from it, but also acknowledging the bits that I'm actually getting right. And failure is rarely absolute. The fact that the final result didn't work out doesn't mean that all the steps along the way were incorrect. I love to address failure like a maths problem. When I was growing up and doing maths, they said this question is 20 marks. And you can get the workings all through up until the end, miss something, and the final answer is incorrect, and they give you 15 out of the 20 marks. That is what failure is like. The end may not be the result you want, but you have marks along the way. Wow. Thank you so much for sending these questions in. I absolutely love answering them. So please, if this has been helpful, share it, like it, comment, and please share more and more questions so that in one of these episodes, I am able to answer it, whether it's questions on life, on love, or leadership, your career, and the like. Until next time, stay blessed.